Properly addressed election mail is coming back. Oh, they're like, oh, this is a Trump voter. Undeliverable. Put that in that pile. Oh, Harris. Perfect. Okay, actually give this to FedEx, okay, so they can deliver it. So we make sure it gets there. Feds increase security for the January 6th event to stop another Capitol attack, which they allowed to happen or instigated themselves. Wow, shocking. I wonder, did they consult with Mayor Muriel Bowser about this? Did she reject this request?
Former President Trump's application for them to hear an appeal on the gag order before his sentencing was rejected because, in the court's view, there was no substantial constitutional question directly involved.
Election officials are now admitting that there are some pretty widespread problems out there in our 2024 election. And this is curious because just 4 years ago, they told us that there were no widespread problems. Actually, the evolution of that fake 2020 election was perfect narrative went something like this. It was like, oh, there's no fraud at all. It never happens. And they're like, oh, well, it was a little bit of fraud. Okay. Kind of a lot of fraud, but it wasn't widespread. And actually it was widespread. So now it wasn't widespread enough to influence the outcome of the election. And then we said, yeah, it was. Look around. Tens of thousands of votes, hundreds of thousands. So it was widespread enough to impact the outcome of the election. So then they abandoned that one. And then they went forward and they said, well, no court of law found that it was consequential enough to reverse the election. You say, oh, okay. So there you go, right? So the rigged lawfare that went forward, that manipulated the election rules, that then made it impossible for Trump or the Republicans to challenge any of these things because there were already prior findings. There were already arguments about standing. It was not ripe. Okay, if they filed the election claim too soon, they said, no, you can't file it too soon. There's no evidence of fraud. It's not ripe enough. So then they said, okay. So then they file it after the election and they said, oh, sorry, you filed too late. You should have filed it early. Now latches apply and you can't recover because of your delay. And we said, what? And then other people sued and said, well, we weren't a party to any of this. And so what about us? Can we sue? No, you don't have standing either. So just eat it. And the Supreme Court snubbed their nose at a bunch of Republican attorney generals and didn't do anything about it. And so let's go through this. Now, we know that you go to the DMV or the post office, a lot of these entities, these institutions, look at the FBI for one, have major problems, systemic problems through them. But some of these problems, we can't just write them off, right? I get so tired of this excuse. Like, well, it's just a government and government just sucks. So that's why they're corrupt. We saw this with the Secret Service all the time. Well, I don't know. Maybe they're just boneheads. Maybe they're just idiots. They just can't figure out to cover a roof. And so there's no ill will. They're just incompetent. They get that excuse all the time. And so now we're seeing them now admit it in this document. It says state and local election officials from across the country on Wednesday, they suddenly warned that there are problems with the nation's mail delivery system that threaten to disenfranchise voters in the upcoming presidential election. Now, telling the head of the U.S. Postal Service that it has not fixed persistent deficiencies. And there's a phrase going around that says, the point of the system is what it does. I believe that's attributable to Mark Andreessen, the billionaire. The point of the system is what it does. Okay, well, you know there are problems. You know there are deficiencies. You know you're going to have a difficult time collecting these ballots from rural locations. Why are these persistent deficiencies allowed to persevere? Now, in an alarming letter, the AP reports, the official said that over the past year, including the just concluded primary season, mailed ballots that were postmarked on time were received by local election offices days after the deadline to be counted. So these votes are not being counted. They're being disenfranchised. And we know how much the left hates disenfranchising anybody. They hate it so much they don't even want you to have ID because it's hard for certain people of certain colors to get ID, I guess. Racist. They also noted that properly addressed election mail was being returned to them as undeliverable. Oh, properly addressed election mail is coming back. Oh, they're like, oh, this is a Trump voter. Undeliverable. Put that in that pile. Another one. Put it over there. No, we can't deliver that. Nope, that one too. Put it over. Oh, Harris. Perfect. Okay, actually give this to FedEx, okay, so they can deliver it. So we make sure it gets there. A problem that could automatically send voters to inactive status through no fault of their own, potentially creating chaos when those voters show up to cast a ballot. Now, the officials also said that repeated outreach to the Postal Service to resolve these issues had failed, and that the widespread nature of the problems made it clear that these were not one-off mistakes, okay, or a problem with specific facilities. Instead, it demonstrated a pervasive lack of understanding and enforcement of Postal Service policies among employees. Now, the letter to the Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy, she's perfect for the Harris administration, of Joy, Louis of Joy, wonder if this person is as hysterical as Kamala is, came from two groups that represent top election administrators in all 50 states. They told all 50 states, they said, we have not seen improvement or concerted efforts to remediate our concerns, and we implore you to take immediate and tangible corrective action to to address the ongoing performance issues with the mail. Failure to do so will limit voter participation and trust in the election process. So you ask yourself, I wonder where these problems are isolated. Where are they being located? Are they in Arizona? Are they in Georgia? Are they in Pennsylvania? Yeah, probably. The Postal Service, all 50 states, said on Wednesday, and on Wednesday they reiterated the Postmaster General's assurances. She said, we're well positioned to swiftly deliver election mail despite being in the midst of a network modernization that has caused some delivery hiccups. They're admitting it. It's weird. If it says Trump on the ballot, when we scan it, something happens. It's weird. It goes right into the shredder. Mail is currently being delivered in 2.7 days. The post office is still urging voters don't procrastinate. They said, we're ready to deliver. We were successful in 2020 delivering a historic volume of mail-in ballots. Yeah, even the fake ones too. They delivered so many of those too. It's like, here, have some more. Also in 2022, and they're going to do it again in 2024. Great. Adrian Marshall said that we're printing them right now. The two groups, the National Association of Secretaries of State and the National Association of State Election Directors, said local election officials in nearly every state are receiving timely postmarked ballots after Election Day and outside the 3 to 5 business day that they claim is the standard for first-class mail. Now, the letter comes after 2 weeks after the postmaster said that we're ready to handle a flood of the mail-in ballots, even though Trump is continuing to sow doubts in the elections because it was rigged. Now, that year, amid the global pandemic, election officials reported sending just over 69 million ballots, a substantial increase, and both sides are talking to people to bank their votes. Now, Postal Service officials also told reporters last month that almost 98% of ballots were returned to election officials within 3 days. They like to get closer to 100%, but here it is. Officials in rural states have been critical of the Postal Service for years. Like, they'll take care of California, New York, and the blue states. But if you're in the rural areas, wow, no. They've consolidated their mail processing centers. So the rural places, which tend to be more red, not like the suburban cities or the urban cities that are very blue. In addition to being signed by the current and incoming presidents for both groups, the leaders of the groups that represent the local election officials in 25 states were listed. The election officials warned that any election mail returned to an election office as undeliverable could trigger a process outlined in federal law for maintaining an accurate list of registered voters. That means a voter could be made inactive and they got to verify their address. Now in Kansas, he said the recent past president sent his own letter. He said nearly 1,000 ballots from his state's August 6th primary election couldn't be counted because they arrived too late. 1,000 ballots and more are continuing to come in. So all this stuff is just sitting on some postal office worker's desk. Interesting. Weird. Almost like it's intentional. Now, Schwab posted, he said the Pony Express is more efficient at this point. So they're just not getting the ballots back, right? People put them in the mail. The post office is not delivering them. Schwab and other Kansas election officials have also said that some ballots arrive on time, but without postmarks. Like other postal service people are probably just picking them up, which keeps them from being counted. What's more, Schwab told The Joy, local postal clerks have told election officials that they can't add postmarks later, even if it's clear that the Postal Service handled the ballot ahead of the mail-in deadline. Yeah, man, it's a problem, you know. Oh, these just don't have postmarks, or these do, we'll count them, we won't count them. It's really good to be the scoreboard keeper. Kansas will count ballots postmarked on or before Election Day. The Republican-controlled legislature created a grace period. In their letter, election officials also said colleagues across the U.S. have reported that Postal Service staff, from managers to mail carriers, are uninformed about the service's policies for election mail. So all the Postal Service people are like, I don't know what to do with this. There is no amount of proactive communication election officials can do to account for their inability to meet their own timelines. They need a committed partner in the Postal Service, not people who are going to, just through the commonplace government incompetence, fail to count the votes, right? This is why people have criticisms about mail-in voting, because of crap like this. Now, we made these reservations and concerns known in 2020, but they told us we were crazy. It's ridiculous. Everything got delivered. Everything got counted. No illegals voted. There's no dead people voting. Ballot rolls are perfect. And there was no manipulation of the electoral laws by guys like Mark Elias or others. There was no illegal funds that were being pumped in by guys like Mark Zuckerberg. Maybe not illegal, but basically. And then we have the censorship from the FBI. Add in the collusion with the CIA. The election was obviously rigged. And so Trump made a point to demand that there was increased security there on January 6th in 2020. They rejected him. They were out there screaming about him, saying that he was going to take over the Capitol. Remember that? We're not going to let Trump stand up National Guard here so he can seize power and all that. So then they rejected Trump's demand for the National Guard. Then the January 6th riot happened because Nancy Pelosi is a failure and didn't answer Stephen Sund's phone calls multiple times. And now they're going to secure the Capitol. Isn't that interesting? Feds increased security for the January 6th event to stop another another Capitol attack, which they allowed to happen or instigated themselves. Wow, shocking. I wonder, did they consult with Mayor Muriel Bowser about this? Did she reject this request? The federal government will dramatically increase security protections for the joint session of Congress. So maybe when they do not seat Trump, they can seize the lever of power. An escalation of government-wide efforts to prevent a repeat of January 6th. So they're gearing up for this again. The MAGA extremists are going to come out and steal the country again. Reality, they're going to do it. The Department of Homeland Security has designated the next electoral count scheduled for January 6, 2025. They're calling it a national special security event, giving the once routine post-election gathering the same level of security accorded to presidential inaugurations and political conventions. The Secret Service, which will take over security for the count, confirmed. So the Secret Service is capable of protecting all of them? They couldn't even protect Trump. They're going to protect the entire Capitol building. Capitol Hill Police couldn't do it. Metro Police couldn't do it. House Sergeant at Arms, Senate Sergeant at Arms, they couldn't figure it out. Now the Secret Service, who can't even put agents on roofs, is going to protect the Capitol? Okay. And the same Secret Service that deleted all the audio footage from the J13th event, the same Secret Service that deleted all of the text messages from the J6 event, yeah, they're going to be in charge. National special security events are events of the highest national significance, they said. The designation, which followed a request from Muriel Bowser. Wow! So she did it this time. She learned her lesson. That's great. Are you going to issue an apology? Are you going to respond to Donald Trump and say, hey, sorry we didn't follow your advice the last time? Are any of them going to come out with a mea culpa? No. They're just going to say, see, he's responsible for January 6th. No, you are. You're fixing the problem that you caused, and you're admitting it right now. So there's a recommendation from the fake January 6th committee, which was illegally constituted under their own House bill, Resolution 503, is intended to unlock funds and law enforcement resources. Maybe they can steal those from DOJ's slush fund like Jack Smith did, the illegal prosecutor, from across the federal government to protect members of Congress this time while they certify the election results or steal them. The very job lawmakers were doing when a mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol. Also federal agents and undercover agents. But Congress, which is in the midst of a fierce battle over government funding, must make sure the Secret Service has enough money. Yeah. So they'll fund them to protect the Capitol and give them more money, even though they just failed to almost protect Trump and somebody got killed at a rally, Corey Compatore. We got DHS decision is only the latest step in an effort by people to prevent a repeat of the chaos, which they caused the last time by not securing the building and shooting people in the face. Across Washington and the country, lawmakers, aides, and other activists want a peaceful transition of power. Maybe they shouldn't steal elections then. Their fears, which they have had laid out in tabletop exercises, all right, some worry that members of the House of Representatives could struggle for weeks to elect a speaker, making the certification of the election results impossible. Others are concerned that a handful of lawmakers could delay the seating of the members-elect, leaving the people elected by voters to represent their districts hamstrung, right? So the whole thing may be shut down. The people gaming out these potential scenarios acknowledge they can't possibly anticipate every possible threat to the peaceful transfer of power. Okay. The fact that Trump declined during his debate to express a single regret of his actions. He did. He expressed a regret that Nancy Pelosi failed to secure the Capitol about his actions, right? They're so pathetic. It's not his Capitol building. It's Congress. It's their Capitol building. And he also demanded 10,000 National Guard. So the idea that he waited 3 hours or 4 hours or 5 hours, he could have waited 50 hours. It's not his responsibility. He posted a video about it. He already made his efforts. It's a separate but co-equal branch of government. It's not his responsibility. But the people gaming out the post-election landscape are determined to avoid the pitfalls they experienced the last time around. Here's what Jamie Raskin said. So we are now trying to prepare for every conceivable contingency that we can think of. He's plotting to steal the election, right? That's what that means. A team under Morell, the ranking Democrat, is handling the research and the analysis behind the, quote, list of horribles, as one person said. Off the Hill, a small working group within the Protect Democracy group, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and fighting threats to American democracy. They should be fighting the Democrats who are wrecking our free speech, our due process of law, and our equal balance of justice, our scales of justice, has been facilitating tabletop exercises to game out what might happen, right? They sit around and they ideate, right? You might do this in your companies with a whiteboard. Okay, quarter one, we're doing this. Quarter two, we're doing this. Quarter three, but they're doing the same thing. A broader group of people with congressional, political, and legal expertise initially gathered for one big meeting that dispersed into breakout sessions where they ran through all the twists and turns of different scenarios, which means Trump wins, according to one participant who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss confidential planning. Following that meeting, a smaller group of congressional and parliamentary experts have met on a monthly basis on a Zoom meeting to drill into the details of various post-election scenarios. This is the same thing we saw in 2020, the cabal of people that Time told us about. The meetings and group sessions are confidential, but Ian Bassin is the co-founder and the executive director of, quote, Protect Democracy. They acknowledged the work of the group in a statement to the Post. They said, the last time Congress met to count presidential electoral votes, Trump incited an insurrection on the Capitol, after which 147 members voted to thwart the will of the voters. The law has been updated, and so they're working, right? So if they have, like, they're trying to get a contingent election or something to happen where they can invoke the 14th Amendment to say they're not going to seat Trump. At the Capitol Police D Street headquarters, Thomas Manger, who took over the force 6 months after the riot, is already thinking through security. Members of Congress are not fully engaged on the planning yet. Capitol Police now has 2,200 officers, 250 more than years ago. Okay. And so they could also add unscalable fencing around. They're making intelligence a priority. And in addition to the Capitol grounds, they're also protecting Congress people. So they're bracing for it again, right? They're plotting all over the place. And Republicans, well, at least the so-called Republicans like Romney and McConnell, they're not really worried about this at all. It's like Democrats can do whatever the hell they want. Now, Nancy Mace is a Republican congresswoman, and she's also digging into the rigged election. She wants to know more about the censorship that's coming out of the Biden White House. She sent this over to Joe and to Kamala. Dear Joe and Kamala Harris, got a question or two for you. Nancy Mace wrote to them, says, look, you two, basically it's now Harris. Joe Biden's been gone for a long time, so we have de facto incumbent President Harris. In the interest of good government, she says, and to ensure the integrity of this upcoming national election, I am writing about information about your suppression campaigns that you're currently engaged in. I want to know about it. Now, I urge you to cease and desist this activity. Stop exerting political pressure from the White House. Here's what we know. On August 26, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook guy, posted a frank letter where he said that the Biden administration repeatedly pressured our team for months to censor certain information. They didn't even agree with it, but they did it. Previously, in 2022, Zuckerberg confirmed that Facebook's censorship also included the censorship of the laptop because the FBI was working with them on that. And they were fed information from the CIA operative, which included Mike Morrell and Anthony Blinken. Facebook, they said, should be cautious about this misinfo. Now, similarly, Twitter's decision to censor the Hunter Biden story and others were a big problem. We held a hearing on this to investigate what happened, and we noticed that the censorship of the Hunter laptop story directly impacted voting results. Talk about election interference. Talk about a conspiracy to rig an election. CIA, through their contractors, and the FBI censored the story. In 7 swing states, found that 17% of people might have switched their votes if they would have known that Hunter was dishonest and trading on his daddy's name to exploit America. 4 years on, the nation cannot afford a repeat of this. So Nancy Mace is demanding answers from the White House. Says Mr. Zuckerberg's latest disclosure arrives right in the middle of an election. Troubling revelations reveal how Facebook and Google sites responded to people looking up even the Trump assassination attempt. Remember, we went to Google to look for it? It's like, no. Trump assassin what? No. Never happened. From the outset, your administration, Harris Biden, has advertised its willingness to manipulate the content on social media. In fact, in 2021, Jen Psaki, host of MSNBC's hit show called Inside Jen Psaki, stated at a press briefing that the administration was flagging problematic posts for Facebook to spread disinfo. Remember when she came out and told that to America? And the next day clarified that the White House was in regular contact with social media companies to censor us, you and me. Now, the White House has not even apologized for this. In fact, they're doing it. They're doubling down on it because the Supreme Court said, sure, go ahead. In contrast, House Republicans have sought to prevent political interference with social media sites. Soon after assuming the majority, the Oversight Committee held a hearing to talk about this, and we approved H.R. 140, which is Protecting Speech from Government Interference Act, which is nuts that we even need that since we have the First Amendment. The bill expressly prohibits federal employees from attempting to censor private speech, which should already be illegal, including on social media sites. The bill was approved by the full House in March 9th, 2023. And so since the Democratic useless Senate has failed to take this up, the door has remained open for further political interference from you, Joe, and therefore we want to know the following. We want all communications with social media companies or any private sector entities about the concealment or the suppression of information on their sites from you. We want to know about all communications between your employees and social media companies with any private sector or entity. Now, send this information to us. We're going to be investigating this. We have the authority to do it because we're Congress. We have Rule 10, which says we can investigate any matter at any time. And so we'll be looking forward to your your documents. That's from Nancy Mace. The likelihood that we'll get anything of those is very low. But they're keeping the pressure on the White House, and we know that this censorship is going to continue on because the Supreme Court declined to hear the censorship case, or basically enabled it throughout the remainder of the election. So it will continue on. Now, we also saw that Trump and his gag order appeal have been rejected by the New York Court of Appeals. So the censorship continues, right? Trump is not allowed to speak, which means we are not allowed to hear the truth about what's going on in New York. And as usual, MSNBC is very happy about this.
Breaking news in former President Donald Trump's legal troubles. Just in the last hour, the New York Court of Appeals rejected Trump's efforts to overturn the gag order in his hush money criminal case. Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. Lisa, good morning. What more do we know about the court's decision?
You know, Jose, sometimes when a court acts, we see an entire opinion. Other times when they reject an application, we can see as little as one word, the word rejected or denied. This is more in that latter category. All we know that the court has said is that former President Trump's application for them to hear an appeal on the gag order before his sentencing was rejected because, in the court's view, there was no substantial constitutional question directly involved. And I want to pause there on the word directly. That may be the court signaling that they understand that, for example, the entire case does present a very serious constitutional question now that the Supreme Court has ruled on presidential immunity. But as to the gag order, the New York Court of Appeals, the highest court in this state, saying there is no significant question that would justify an appeal before them at this time, Jose.
And so, Lisa,
which is ridiculous because the case is over and we're in the middle of an election and Trump has free speech. They're not even going to consider it because they don't want Trump to be able to talk about the judge's daughter, about the fact that she worked for Kamala Harris for president, literally. The fact that the judge donated 3 times to Joe Biden, one of those earmarked to stop Republicans, specifically Donald Trump. All corrupt, but they want to bury it and they don't want Trump to talk about it. But Trump's attorney, Alina, she is out speaking about a lot of this, making the case that Kamala Harris is terrible. And so if Trump can't talk about the judge, we'll talk about Kamala Harris and how bad she is and how she is the architect, along with Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration, of all the lawfare that's been brought against president.
The border crisis has created 60% more rapes of women. We have 325,000 children who are lost from their families as a result of her actions. She's going to act like she's a lawyer, but as a lawyer, I can say what she's done to the city is an absolute disgrace. She can't get away from her last 3.5 years, Jesse, and that's the truth. We have the privilege of knowing what she is and can do because she's still sitting there, and what President Trump did, and it's completely different. So what do you want, America? You want the last 3.5 years or you want the prior 4? I think the answer is pretty clear. So all he's got to do is just...
We want the prior 4, no doubt about that. And it was a much better country when Trump was in charge. And so hopefully the debate was able to reveal that to everybody who watched, and the right decision is made.